Touch me once more, the Alpha King dared she did, and he claimed her on the spot. Beneath the crescent moon, the castle stood like a sentinel, its dark spires cutting into the night sky. The kingdom had always been one of shadows and secrets, where whispers of curses and ancient magic lingered longer than sunlight. Lady Alara moved quietly along the cobblestone path leading to the main hall. Her heart beat with a mixture of fear and resolve. Tonight, she would meet the Alpha King, the ruler of Eldoria, a man whose name alone commanded awe and caution. She had heard the stories, how his gaze could pierce through the bravest of hearts, how his presence could silence an entire court. But what terrified her most was the unknown, how her own strange gift, a touch that brought visions both wondrous and dangerous, would be received by him. As she entered the hall, the grand chandeliers threw shards of light across the marble floors. Courtiers murmured, eyes darting toward her as she passed, for she was not merely another noblewoman. She carried the legacy of a family whispered to hold powers long feared and seldom understood. Some said her hands bore omens, glimpses of the future wrapped in shadow. Others whispered that even kings dared not touch her. At the far end of the hall he waited. The Alpha King stood tall and unyielding, his black cloak trailing like a shadow behind him. His hair, dark as a raven's wing, framed a face both cruel and magnetic, sharp eyes fixed directly on hers. Even from afar, Alara felt a pull, a dangerous attraction that made her pulse quicken. "You've come," his voice rumbled, low and commanding, as though the walls themselves had spoken. Alara bowed slightly, keeping her hands folded in front of her. "I come at your invitation, your grace," she said, striving to keep her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. He studied her silently as if weighing every thought that crossed her mind. Then, unexpectedly, a faint smile curved his lips. "I have heard tales of your touch," he said softly. "I wonder, do they speak the truth?" Her breath caught. The tales of her gift had been kept secret for years, known only to her family and a few trusted allies. How could he know? She began, then stopped, uncertain. His eyes held her in a grip stronger than any chains. There was no mockery there, only curiosity, hunger, and a subtle, almost terrifying kindness that unsettled her deeply. "Do not fear me," he said. "I am not like the others who have sought to exploit you, or worse, fear you." Despite his words, fear fluttered in her chest. This was no ordinary king. She had heard whispers of his powers, of the strange connection he held with the shadows themselves. To touch him could mean revealing too much of herself, too much of her gift. And yet, the pull she felt toward him was undeniable. He stepped closer, the soft echo of his boots on marble resonating through the hall. "I ask only for a moment," he said. "A single touch. Will you dare?" Alara hesitated, feeling the weight of the entire hall on her shoulders. Courtiers were silent, watching, anticipating what would happen. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted it toward him. She could feel the hum of magic, the faint pulse of her own power resonating through her veins. And then, as if drawn by a force beyond reason, she touched his hand. A shock ran through her, not of pain but of awareness of connection. She saw flashes, memories, emotions, the raw pulse of the man before her. He was not merely a king. He was a storm, both destructive and magnificent. Her gift, once feared as a curse, now revealed truths that even she had never dared to see. The Alpha King held her gaze steadily, his own hand not withdrawing, not flinching. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, his eyes softening just a fraction. "So," he whispered, his voice almost tender now, "this is the truth of you, and yet you do not frighten me." Alara pulled back slightly, startled by the intimacy of the moment. She had expected fear or anger, perhaps even cruelty. But what she found instead was understanding, a recognition that unsettled her deeply. The hall seemed to shrink around them, shadows gathering as if to shield this encounter from the rest of the world. I do not understand why you are not afraid," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He smiled faintly, a shadow of amusement in his eyes. "Fear is a choice, Lady Alara, and I choose not to fear you." The courtiers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something extraordinary had just unfolded. Whispers spread like wind through dry leaves, tales of magic and kings, of a woman who dared to touch the untouchable. But neither Alara nor the Alpha King paid them any mind. They were caught in a moment that belonged entirely to themselves, a spark of fate that neither could ignore. Yet, even in this rare intimacy, danger lingered. The castle, though grand, was alive with secrets and conspiracies. Somewhere in the shadows, eyes watched, waiting for the slightest misstep. For every spark of connection, there was a shadow of threat, and both knew that trust was as fragile as glass. The Alpha King finally withdrew his hand, but the air between them remained charged, heavy with unspoken words. "You will remain at court," he said finally, his tone both decree and invitation. "Not as a prisoner, but as something more. I cannot yet name it, even to myself. But I sense that our destinies are entwined, Lady Alara, and the choice is no longer yours alone." Alara nodded, though her heart pounded in confusion. Her mind raced with questions. Why him? Why now? Why did her very soul feel pulled toward a man she barely knew? And yet, despite the uncertainty, a part of her yearned to follow him, to understand the depth of the connection that had awakened with a single touch. As she turned to leave, a figure slipped from the shadows. A servant, or perhaps a spy, whispered urgently into her ear, "My lady, the queen's advisors know of the king's curiosity. Some, they do not take kindly to it." Her stomach sank. She had known that court politics were dangerous, but she had not realized just how swiftly intrigue could move, how quickly a single moment of truth could spark fear and envy. The Alpha King's gaze followed her as she walked away, a shadow of something unreadable in his eyes. Power, longing, and something deeper, perhaps regret, flickered across his face. He whispered to himself, as if to summon the night itself, "No force in this kingdom will claim her but me." The moon hung low, blood-red now, as if marking the beginning of something vast and perilous. Alara reached the corridors of her chambers, her mind still echoing with the feel of his hand, the intensity of his gaze, and the strange, dangerous thrill of being seen for who she truly was. And then she felt it, the subtle pulse of magic in the air, a warning she could not yet name. A shadow stirred in the far corner of the hall, watching, waiting. Someone or something knew the moment that had just passed. And if the Alpha King's enemies had learned of it, then neither her gift nor his power could keep them safe. She shivered, not from the cold, but from the sense of fate pressing in. This night, this single touch, had set into motion a chain of events that would challenge them both, testing their courage, their hearts, and the very limits of what it meant to love in a world of shadows. Somewhere in the dark corridors of the castle, a voice whispered her name. Not a human voice, nor a friendly one. The whisper promised change, danger, and destiny. And in that moment, Lady Alara realized the reckoning of her fate had only just begun. The sun rose over Eldoria like a pale promise, casting a muted glow over the castle's black towers. Lady Alara sat in her chambers, staring at the floor, her fingers tracing invisible patterns across the cold stone. She could still feel the king's hand, the weight of his gaze, the strange spark that had ignited the moment their skin had met. Yet along with the memory came a warning, a whisper of danger lurking unseen. The court was no place for hesitation. Today, she would attend her first council meeting at the Alpha King's side. She was no ordinary noblewoman, but even so, sitting among the advisors and courtiers felt like stepping into a storm. Eyes would watch her every move, judging, weighing, and waiting for the moment she faltered. When she entered the great hall, the Alpha King was already there, standing tall among his advisors. The room seemed to quiet, the murmurs fading as if the very air recognized his presence. His dark eyes found hers immediately, and in that instant, the tension between them flared anew. It was subtle, a glance that carried command and curiosity, yet it left her trembling in ways she could not name. "Lady Alara," he said, his voice low but carrying clearly across the hall, "you will sit beside me today, not as a guest but as a participant. Your voice is needed." She nodded, surprised by the weight of his words. He trusted her, not merely as a curiosity but as someone whose insight might matter. That trust was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She followed him to a seat beside his, noting how the courtiers' eyes darted toward her, some in admiration, others in suspicion. The council began. Advisors spoke of taxes, of border skirmishes, of alliances and betrayals. Alara listened carefully, sensing undercurrents of resentment and ambition. She had been trained in diplomacy, but nothing could have prepared her for the subtle games of power played by those who had long sat in shadows. Every word carried weight, every glance could conceal danger. Then the king spoke, his tone sharp but measured. "The forests to the north are restless," he said. "Reports speak of strange creatures moving among the trees, shadows that vanish and reappear. Magic may be stirring. We must be prepared." The room murmured, the mention of magic sparking both fear and curiosity. Alara's pulse quickened. Magic and shadows had always been part of her life, but in the hands of others it could be weaponized. She dared not reveal the full measure of her own power, not yet. As the meeting continued, a courtier named Lord Riven spoke. "My king, if we cannot trust the reports, how can we protect the borders? Perhaps the northern forests should be avoided until the creatures fade." His voice was smooth, almost polite, but Alara could sense the underlying threat. He tested the king, subtly questioning his authority while implying that he knew more than he should. The Alpha King's gaze sharpened. "Avoidance is weakness," he said. "We face threats not in fear but in command. If we yield now, the shadows will grow bolder." Alara noticed the way the king's hand rested on the arm of his chair, subtle but commanding, almost like a coiled spring ready to strike. It reminded her of the first touch, the sudden shock of recognition, the pull that she could not resist. She felt her heart quicken, and she realized that the danger of the court was not only in politics, but also in her own growing attachment to him. Later, she found herself walking the castle gardens, needing the quiet to breathe. The night before, a shadow had moved in the corridors, a silent observer of her and the king's moment. Now, even in daylight, she felt the gaze of unseen eyes. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets she could not yet understand. And then, unexpectedly, the Alpha King appeared beside her. "You should not wander alone," he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. His presence made the air around her feel heavier, warmer, as if the shadows themselves bowed to him. I needed air," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. She did not want to betray the quickened rhythm of her heart, nor the pull she felt toward him. He studied her, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink around them. "Do you regret your choice to touch me?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No, though I do not understand it. Why do I feel drawn to you when I should be afraid?" "Because some bonds are not meant to be broken," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Some sparks cannot be denied, no matter how dark the night around them." She looked down, feeling a flush rise in her cheeks. It was not fear or shame, but something deeper, an acknowledgement that the connection they shared was extraordinary, yet perilous. Their bond, once a simple touch, had grown into something that neither of them fully understood, something that carried both longing and warning. Days passed, each bringing new trials. Advisors plotted, rumors swirled, and the northern forests grew ever more mysterious. Lady Alara and the king were drawn together repeatedly, their encounters charged with unspoken words. They shared moments of quiet conversation, fleeting touches, and glimpses into each other's pasts, each revelation deepening the tension between them. One evening, as the castle slept under a blanket of mist, the Alpha King summoned Alara to the tower balcony. The night was alive with stars, and the moon cast silver light across the stone. "Tell me what you see," he said, turning his hand palm up toward her. Her gift, her touch, had always been a source of both fear and insight. With hesitation, she placed her hand lightly against his. Visions flared, scenes of battles to come, of shadows moving across the kingdom, of choices that could bind or break them. But among the visions was something unexpected. His childhood, lonely and burdened, his desire not just for power but for understanding and connection. She pulled back, breathless. You are more than the world believes, Your Grace. You carry so much alone." He smiled faintly, a shadow of vulnerability in his eyes. "And you see it, yet you do not fear me. That is rare." Alara's heart ached with the weight of their shared secret. She longed to reach for him again, to bridge the distance between caution and desire, but the world outside their small balcony demanded vigilance. The castle walls held ears, and power was never without watchers. Then, a sudden movement caught her eye. Across the courtyard, a figure in dark robes slipped among the shadows, almost invisible beneath the moonlight. Her pulse quickened. Someone was observing them, someone who knew more than they should. "Go inside," the king said, his voice low but urgent. "We are not alone." Alara hesitated but obeyed. As she stepped back, the figure vanished into the night, leaving only the whisper of wind and the faint echo of danger. Inside the castle, whispers had already begun. Courtiers and advisors had noticed her closeness with the king, and not all were pleased. Some saw opportunity, others threat. And somewhere in the darkness of the halls, eyes watched and waited for the moment to strike. That night, as she lay in her chambers, Alara could not sleep. She thought of the king's hand, the visions her touch had revealed, and the silent threat that lingered in the castle. The thrill of connection was tempered by fear, the promise of love shadowed by danger. Yet even in the darkest moments, she felt a strange certainty. Whatever awaited them, they were bound together and neither could turn away. Days turned into weeks. Each encounter at court, each council meeting, each whispered conversation in hidden corridors strengthened the bond between them. The Alpha King began to trust her judgment, seeking her counsel on matters of strategy and diplomacy. She in turn began to understand his burden, the weight of the crown, the demands of loyalty, the shadows that haunted his past. And through it all, the shadow in the castle remained. An unseen presence, watching, waiting, feeding on tension and perhaps plotting. Its intentions were unknown, but its effect was undeniable. Every moment of intimacy, every shared glance, carried the risk of exposure and consequence. One night, as the first frost of winter coated the castle's towers, the Alpha King summoned Alara to the inner garden. Snowflakes drifted silently, dusting the dark stone with silver. He extended his hand, not demanding but inviting. "Do you trust me?" he asked, her breath caught. I want to," she said honestly, her eyes meeting his. "Then step forward," he said. She did, and as her hand met his once more, a wave of energy passed between them. This time, it was not only insight she felt, but reassurance, a sense of unity and strength. They were allies, not merely in the court's intrigue, but in the unseen battles that loomed over Eldoria. Yet in the shadows beyond the garden walls, the figure waited, watching, waiting for the moment to strike, because in a kingdom where power and desire were inseparable, love alone was never enough to protect them. Cliffhanger. They are bound, but not for long. The shadow that had haunted their every moment stirred closer, and somewhere in the dark, plans were already unfolding that could shatter their fragile bond. Winter had settled over Eldoria, blanketing the kingdom in a quiet frost that hid dangers beneath its beauty. Lady Alara moved carefully through the corridors of the castle, her cloak drawn tightly around her. Each step echoed softly, a reminder that the halls held more than stones. They held eyes and ears, whispers and schemes. The Alpha King had grown closer to her over the past weeks, but their bond was no simple thing. Their touches and shared glances carried weight, and the world around them was watching, waiting for a mistake, a spark, a moment to exploit. Both of them felt it, the threads of fate pulling tighter, binding them together against forces neither could yet name. That evening, she found him in the highest tower, looking out over the northern forests. Shadows clung to the trees, restless and alive, as though anticipating the coming of something ancient. "The forests grow restless," he said without turning, his voice quiet but firm. "The creatures there, they are drawn to power, and yours is not yet hidden." Alara stepped closer, placing a tentative hand on the railing beside him. "I can control it," she said softly, "if I focus, but there is something watching me, always." He finally turned, his dark eyes meeting hers. "I know," he said. "I have felt it since the first moment you touched me. There is a presence here, and it grows stronger with each day. We cannot ignore it." She shivered, not from the cold, but from the intensity of his gaze. "What do we do?" He reached out, taking her hand in his. The touch was grounding, steadying, yet electric. "We face it," he said, "together." That night the castle was restless. Servants whispered of shadows moving where no person should be, and in the council hall rumors grew of the northern forest stirring with strange magic. The Alpha King and Alara knew it was no ordinary threat. Someone, or something, was testing them, pushing them to reveal the truth of their connection and the depths of their powers. The following day, the first challenge arrived. A messenger from the northern border arrived in the hall, breathless and pale. "My king," he said, bowing quickly, "the northern forest's creatures have appeared. They attack travelers and burn the paths. Something unnatural moves among the trees." The Alpha King's jaw tightened. "Prepare the guards," he said, his voice sharp. "We will investigate, and you," he said, turning to Alara, "will come with me. Your insight may guide us where strength alone cannot." Her heart raced. She had trained for moments like this, yet the thought of facing the unknown, creatures born of shadows, forces beyond reason, was terrifying. And yet, beside the king, she felt a courage she had never known. The journey north was treacherous. Snow drifted across the frozen landscape, and the forests loomed like dark walls. Even the guards whispered uneasily, sensing the unnatural weight in the air. Shadows seemed to shift and move with their steps, and the wind carried whispers that made the hair on Alara's arms stand on end. At the heart of the forest, they encountered the first sign of the threat, a clearing where the ground was scorched, trees blackened and twisted as if by invisible fire. The Alpha King studied the scene carefully. "This is no ordinary forest fire," he said. "Magic, dark and old. It seeks something or someone." Alara stepped forward cautiously. Her hand hovered in the air, tracing faint patterns as she reached out with her gift. Visions flashed before her eyes, the forest alive with shadows, whispers of power, a figure cloaked in darkness moving just beyond their sight. The presence was powerful, older than any magic she had felt before. "They know we are here," she whispered, fear and determination mingling in her voice. "And they are waiting." The king nodded. "Then we must be ready." Night fell, and the forest seemed to close in around them. The wind carried voices, low and threatening, yet no one could be seen. Alara and the king stood together, back to back, feeling the pulse of the forest and the tension in the air. Then, from the shadows, movement. A figure emerged, not human, not beast, but something in between. Eyes like embers glowed, and a presence pressed upon them, testing their strength and will. Alara felt her heart pound. The creature seemed drawn to her, sensing the magic she had tried to hide, the power she had only begun to understand. The Alpha King stepped forward, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword. "You will harm nothing that I command," he said, voice carrying the authority of a storm. The creature paused, its glowing eyes fixing on Alara. She felt a surge of fear, and then resolve. With trembling hands, she reached out, placing her palm against the air, focusing her power. Energy pulsed from her, not as a weapon but as a force of will, of connection. The shadows hesitated and the creature faltered, retreating slightly. The king's eyes softened as he watched her. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly, almost to himself. Alara nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and triumph. I can control it if I trust myself." Together they faced the shadows, moving deeper into the forest, each step strengthening their bond. The king's hand brushed hers, a touch filled with unspoken reassurance. Each glance carried more than words could express: trust, respect, and the stirrings of something deeper, something that had been growing quietly in the spaces between them. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the whispers of the wind and the rustle of branches. Then finally, they reached a hidden glade where the shadows seemed to gather like a storm waiting to break. At its center, a figure cloaked in darkness waited, eyes glowing with knowledge and malice. "You seek power you cannot claim," the figure said, voice echoing through the trees. "The bond you share is fragile and the magic she carries is not yours to command." The king stepped forward, shield raised. "You are mistaken. Our bond is not for the weak or timid. It is forged by choice, courage, and trust." The figure laughed, a sound like shattered glass. "Then prove it." The ground trembled, shadows swirling around them, and Alara felt the weight of destiny pressing down. She turned to the king, eyes wide. I cannot do this alone." "You are not alone," he said firmly. "Never, not while I stand beside you." Together they reached out, their hands touching, energy flowing between them. Light met shadow, and a wave of power surged through the glade, pushing back the darkness, forcing the cloaked figure to retreat into the forest. The threat was not gone, but it had been tested, weakened by their unity and trust. Exhausted but unbroken, they stood in the clearing, hands still clasped. The king's eyes held a mix of admiration, relief, and something softer, almost unspoken. "You have grown stronger," he said, voice low. "Stronger than even I imagined." Alara looked down, a smile breaking through the tension. I could not have done it without you." He lifted her chin gently, meeting her gaze. "And I could not have faced it without you." For a moment the world seemed to fall away, leaving only them, two souls bound by fate, trust, and a growing connection that neither could deny. But even in this moment of triumph, danger lingered. The cloaked figure in the forest was not gone, only retreating. Plans were forming, schemes that would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. Their victory was only the beginning. As they returned to the castle, the king and Alara moved through the corridors side by side. The bond they shared had deepened, tempered by fear, courage, and shared triumph. And yet in the shadows, eyes watched, whispering of the power the woman carried, the influence of the king, and the storm that was coming. That night in her chambers, Alara could not sleep. She thought of the forest, the shadows, and the cloaked figure who had challenged them. She thought of the king, his hand in hers, his trust in her, and the warmth of connection that went deeper than any court intrigue or magical threat. She realized, with a mixture of fear and longing, that she could no longer deny the bond that had grown between them. It was dangerous, yes, and the world would not allow it to exist without challenge. But it was real. And she would face whatever came next, not alone but with him. Cliffhanger. Tomorrow the true test would come, one that could break them apart or forge them together in a bond stronger than any magic in Eldoria. Winter's frost had begun to thaw in Eldoria, but the air still carried a crisp edge, sharp as a blade. Lady Alara moved quietly through the castle halls, her cloak brushing against the stone. The memory of the northern forest of shadows and whispers still lingered, but she felt stronger now, tempered by experience, courage, and the bond she shared with the Alpha King. The castle, however, did not share her sense of calm. Rumors of dark magic and restless shadows spread like wildfire. Courtiers whispered of a force older than the kingdom itself, one that sought to exploit her gift and the Alpha King's power. And the cloaked figure, the shadow that had tested them in the forest, still moved unseen, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That evening the king summoned her to the throne room. The room was vast and shadowed, the torches flickering against the walls. The king stood at the center, his cloak trailing behind him, his eyes dark and commanding. Yet when he saw Elara, a softness touched his expression, a rare warmth reserved only for her. "Lady Elara," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a storm yet the tenderness of trust, "tonight we face the true threat to Eldoria. You and I together must end it, or the kingdom will fall." Elara felt a shiver of both fear and determination. She had faced darkness before, but never like this. Never had the stakes felt so high, nor the trust between them so vital. "I am ready," she said, voice steady, though her heart beat like a drum. The Alpha King extended his hand, and she took it, feeling the familiar warmth and strength of his presence. "Then let us go," he said. They traveled to the northern forests, where shadows still lingered among the trees. The creatures that had once tested them were restless, and the air seemed alive with anticipation. Every step they took carried a tension that pressed against their courage, yet the bond between them kept them grounded. At the heart of the forest they found the cloaked figure waiting. Its eyes glowed like molten gold, and it exuded power that seemed older than Eldoria itself. "You think you can face me together," the figure said, voice echoing like a chorus of whispers. "Your bond is fragile. Your magic is raw, you cannot withstand what comes next." The king stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Elara's shoulder. "Our bond is not fragile," he said. "It is forged by choice, by courage, and by trust. We stand together." Elara drew a deep breath, feeling the pulse of her magic. She reached out, letting her energy flow, connecting with the king, merging their strength. Together they were more than the sum of their parts, stronger, braver, and ready. The shadow laughed, a sound like broken ice. "Then prove it," it said, and the forest seemed to come alive with dark magic. Trees bent unnaturally, winds whipped around them, and whispers filled the air, testing their resolve. The king and Elara stood firm, hands clasped, energy flowing between them. Their connection was no longer simple curiosity or attraction. It was a bond forged in struggle, trust, and shared courage. Elara's gift, once feared, now served as a guiding light. She touched the air, tracing patterns that drew back the shadows, her magic weaving with the king's strength. The cloaked figure surged forward, a wave of dark power aimed to overwhelm them. The king met it with his sword, not just a weapon but a symbol of will, command, and protection. Elara's energy flared, a pure force of determination, cutting through the darkness. For a moment, time seemed to hang. Shadows and light clashed in the clearing, magic singing in the air, energy crackling like lightning. And then, with a final surge, their combined power drove the cloaked figure back, forcing it to retreat into the forest, leaving behind only silence and a faint glow where it had stood. Exhausted but victorious, they sank to the snow-covered ground, hands still clasped. The king looked at her, eyes softened with admiration and something deeper, almost reverent. You were magnificent," he said, "stronger than even I imagined." Elara smiled, her breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. We did it together," she said. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, together," he murmured, voice carrying a weight that went beyond victory. "You have changed me, Elara, shown me what it means to trust, to feel, to hope. I do not want to lose this bond." Her heart ached with the intensity of his words. She had feared that love was dangerous, that closeness would bring ruin. But now, standing in the quiet aftermath of struggle, she understood that the bond between them was not a weakness. It was their greatest strength. They returned to Eldoria as the first light of dawn touched the towers. The kingdom, sensing the end of the dark force, breathed in relief, yet the memory of shadows lingered. People whispered of the king's strength, but none truly understood the role Lady Elara had played. The courage, the trust, the magic she had wielded not as a weapon, but as a force of light and unity. That night in the quiet of the castle, the king led her to the highest tower once more. The city lights twinkled below, and the stars above seemed to shine brighter than ever. He turned to her, taking her hands in his. "Elara," he said, voice low, filled with emotion, "I have ruled this kingdom with power, but it was incomplete. I was strong, yes, but alone. You have shown me that strength without connection is hollow. You have awakened something in me I did not know I possessed: hope, trust, and love." Tears blurred her vision, not from sorrow, but from the depth of feeling. "And you have given me courage I never knew I had, not just for the magic, but for myself. For who I am and who we can be together." He drew her closer, their foreheads touching lightly. "Then let this be our promise," he said, voice filled with determination. "Whatever shadows rise, whatever threats come, we face them together. Not as king and noblewoman, but as partners bound by trust and choice." She nodded, heart full. "Together," she whispered. The bond between them, once fragile and uncertain, now shone bright and unbreakable. They were no longer merely allies or companions. They were equal, partners in every sense, each empowering the other, each completing the other in ways neither had expected. The castle around them seemed to exhale, as though recognizing the shift in power, not of the throne, but of hearts united. And for the first time, Eldoria felt safe, not because the king ruled with strength, but because the love and trust between two souls formed a shield stronger than any army. In the days that followed, the kingdom began to heal. Shadows receded from the northern forests, and the courtiers who had whispered of intrigue and fear now looked upon the king and Lady Elara with awe. They had faced darkness together, and the bond they shared had changed the course of the kingdom. Yet even in peace, the world remained alive with magic, possibility, and the unknown. The lessons of the forest, the trials of trust, and the strength of their connection would stay with them always. A reminder that love, courage, and unity could overcome even the darkest of forces. One quiet evening, as snow melted and the first buds of spring appeared, the king and Elara stood once more on the balcony of the highest tower. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of new beginnings. He took her hand, and she rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice soft, almost a whisper. "The promise?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "the promise that we have faced darkness and yet our bond remains, that whatever comes we face it together." Elara smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "Yes, together," she repeated, feeling the weight of the past and the hope of the future. And beneath the stars, in the quiet peace of Eldoria, they touched once more, not in fear, not in testing, but in triumph, in trust, in love that had been forged through shadows and strengthened by courage. Their story was no longer one of uncertainty or danger. It was a tale of redemption, unity, and hearts claimed not by force, but by choice. The night wind carried a soft whisper through the towers, as if the kingdom itself recognized the transformation. The darkness that had threatened them had been faced, challenged, and overcome. And though magic would always stir, and shadows may return, the bond between the Alpha King and Lady Elara was unbreakable. For in the kingdom of Eldoria, where shadows had once ruled hearts, a new power reigned, the light of trust, love, and the choice to face the world together.